The wind clawed through the fields like a starving wolf. Asterisk it howled against the brittle barnwood, rattled the windows of the small blacksmith shop, and flung needles of frost against the iron stove Calder Reed had just stoked to life. Outside, snow drifted in crooked sheets across the dead cornstalks. Burying the past in silence, Calder stood at the doorway, staring out at nothing. His coat hung off one shoulder, his breath curled upward like smoke from a tired fire. He should have gone back inside. Should have shut the door, poured his coffee, fed the horses, hammered steel. But something in the wind wouldn't let him. Then he heard it, not the storm. Not the creak of wood or cry of hawks. It was soft, a cough, then a second. Then silence. He moved without thinking. His boots sank into the crusted snow as he crossed the yard, past the anvil, past the old plow no one had used in 2 winters, until he reached the shed. The lock had snapped weeks ago. He hadn't fixed it. What for? He had nothing worth stealing. He pulled the door open slowly. Darkness. Then movement. A shape shifted in the shadows, and for a moment, Calder thought he'd seen a ghost. But it was a woman. She sat curled in the corner, arms wrapped tight around something. No, someone, a child, and not just one. 2, 3. More. 6 shapes in total, huddled like kittens against the cold, their breath misting weakly in the air. The woman lifted her head, and her eyes met Calder's. She didn't flinch, didn't beg, didn't speak. Just watched him with the hollow gaze of someone who had run too far for too long and was ready to fall. He said nothing. She closed her eyes, as if to say, do what you must, but Calder didn't move. Something inside him, something buried beneath ash and iron and grief, stirred. He dropped to one knee. The smallest child was burning with fever. The others had frostbitten fingers. One girl's shoes were made from rags tied with twine. The oldest boy held a rusted tin knife in his hand, but he didn't raise it. He just stared, defiant and shivering. Come on, Calder muttered, more to himself than them. Get inside. No one moved. He stood, then left the door open. 5 minutes later they followed him. The stove hissed. The cabin smelled of iron and pine tar. Calder ladled broth into chipped bowls, setting them on the table without a word. The children didn't speak either. They ate like ghosts. No slurping, no thank you. Just spoon to mouth, bite after bite, like this was the last meal they'd ever get. The woman sat in the corner, arms around the youngest, who coughed in wheezing gasps between sips of warm liquid. Her hair was tangled, her dress torn at the blood stained her sleeve. She hadn't even asked for it to be cleaned. Calder poured water into a basin and set it near the fire. Still, she said nothing. Hours passed like years. The storm outside howled louder. The wind clawed at the shutters. Calder moved through it all silently, fetching blankets, setting out dry socks, chopping kindling. His own son, Jonah, watched from the loft above, his small fingers curling around the wooden railing. He was 7, sharp-eyed and quiet like his father. Later that night, when the storm had calmed to a whimper, Jonah whispered, Who are they, Pa? Calder didn't look up. People who needed shelter. Will they stay? He paused, then simply, we'll see. The next morning, the town already knew. That's how things worked in a place like Gable's End. News traveled faster than fire, even in snow. By midday, Calder was swinging his hammer in the forge when Emmett Dawes stopped by. Emmett was tall, full of jaw, and empty of warmth, a man who talked too much and listened too little. You talkin' in strays now? He spat, eyeing the footprints near the shed. Calder didn't stop swinging. Sparks leapt. You know what folks are saying? That she's that woman? Widow Harper. The one whose husband turned on the Union boys down by Dry Creek, helped the raiders. They hung him, Cal, hung him with his own belt. Calder said nothing. Emmett stepped closer. Her kind brings trouble. 6 mouths and a ghost's name. You don't owe nothin'. The hammer stopped mid-air. Calder looked up. Then I guess I'll owe more before the week's done. He turned back to the anvil. The iron rang like thunder. That night, one of the children cried. In his sleep. Calder was sitting at the window, cleaning his rifle. He heard it, the broken sob, the gasp for breath. He didn't move. Asterisk a minute later, he heard her, the mother, humming asterisk, not a song. Not really asterisk, just sound like wind through trees. Like a memory trying not to die asterisk. He looked over his shoulder. The fire cast her in gold. Her arms wrapped tight around the boy, her fingers stroking his hair. She didn't cry. She didn't tremble. But her eyes were far away. Calder looked away. He didn't know what scared him more, that she might be lying asterisk, or that she might be telling the truth with every silent breath asterisk. Days passed. Calder fixed the old chicken coop and taught the eldest boy, Abram, how to patch the fence. One of the younger girls drew pictures in the dirt behind the forge. Always the same: fire, men on horses, a tree with something hanging from it. Calder didn't ask. Jonah gave one of the boys his old boots. The widow tried to give them back. Calder shook his head. Asterisk. Keep 'em. Cold don't care whose feet it bites. She nodded once. That was the first thing they agreed on. Then came the sheriff. Asterisk. It was dusk. Snowfall was gentle, like ash. After a blaze. Calder was lighting the lanterns when he saw the horse at the edge of his yard. Sheriff Moxley was a fair man, if fair meant he wouldn't shoot you before asking a question. Asterisk. You got guests? He asked. Calder nodded. You plan on keeping 'em? Calder didn't answer. Moxley sighed, scratching at his gray beard. Rumor says she's the widow of Jesse Harper. Raiders used his name to get through checkpoints. People died, Cal. Asterisk. So. Did he? Calder said. Far as I know, ghosts don't eat soup and carry babies through snow. Asterisk. You'll be held responsible if trouble follows. Calder stared at the sheriff. Then quietly, like a promise carved in oak. Then I'll take the weight. Asterisk. Moxley tipped his hat. You always do. Later that night, she finally spoke. Asterisk. He was outside, bringing in wood, when she appeared in the doorway. The lantern behind her lit up the frost in her hair like a crown. You should have turned us in, she said. He shrugged. Didn't feel like it. Asterisk. My husband wasn't a traitor. He tried to warn the town. They tied him up anyway. The kids saw it happen. He nodded, slow. My name's Evelyn, she added. He looked at her for a long moment. Then, Calder. She nodded once, and just like that, no grand speech, no handshake, no apology. They understood each other, not through words, but through weight. Asterisk. The kind you carry when the world doesn't care whether you stand or break. The wind picked up again, but it sounded different now, less like a warning, more like a breath held between storms. The blizzard left behind a silence, thick as wool. Asterisk. The world lay still under a sheet of pale frost. The horizon bruised with dusk. Snow muffled every sound. Even the cries of the ravens that circled above the trees like omens too tired to scream. Asterisk. Calder stepped through the frozen yard, lantern in one hand, axe in the other. He'd found the tracks that morning, small, meandering prints half swallowed by the snowfall. 2 of the kids had wandered toward the woods, hunting something, maybe, or just running the way children do when they've forgotten what's stillness. Feels like he found them by the stream. The water was black with ice, curling in slow, wounded spirals around a stone where the boys crouched. They were trying to catch something, a squirrel, a rabbit, anything to prove they weren't helpless. The older one, Abram, froze when he saw Calder. Asterisk. We weren't, he began. But Calder just raised the lantern and pointed back toward the barn. Asterisk. Before dark, he said. They ran. He watched their backs until the trees took them. Asterisk. Then he turned to the stream and stared into the glassy water. His reflection looked hollow, tired, like it wanted to say something but had forgotten how. Asterisk. That night, Evelyn stitched the hem of a shirt by firelight while the children ate. Calder fixed the hinge on the loft ladder. Neither spoke, but the air between them wasn't cold anymore. It was cautious, like a path slowly opening through thick woods. Asterisk. The wind knocked once at the door. then left them alone. 3 days later, Evelyn came down with fever. It hit her fast, like a bullet through the ribs. One moment she was hanging laundry on the line behind the forge. The next, she was on the ground, her hand shaking as she tried to crawl back toward the cabin. Jonah found her first. Screamed for Calder. He carried her inside, laid her on the cot near the fire. Her lips were cracked, her pulse thready. Calder pressed cool claws to her forehead. The children gathered in a silent ring, watching with wide eyes and fists clenched. At their sides, she's not gonna die, he muttered, more to himself than them. Not from this. He stayed at her side through the night, spooning broth between her lips, wiping sweat from her collarbone, whispering words he hadn't spoken in years, not prayers, just fragments, old names, half-remembered lullabies. His wife's voice in his head telling him to hold on, to stay. By dawn her fever broke. Her eyes fluttered open, and for the first time, she smiled. It was small, fragile, but it was real. Calder looked away. Not because he didn't want to see it, but because it felt too much like forgiveness. The townsfolk didn't knock anymore. They watched, from porches and behind curtains. In the pews of the chapel, at the steps of the butcher's, they watched him walk with the kids to the creek. Watched him teach Abram to tie a proper knot. Saw the younger ones climbing into his wagon for firewood runs. Saw Evelyn limping slowly behind, wrapped in Jonah's old coat, and they whispered. Calder felt the weight of it, but didn't bow. Not. Until the sign appeared. It was nailed to the side of his fence one morning. The handwriting crude. The message simple. Traitors live here. He burned it without a word. But that night, he stood for a long time beside Lena's grave. He hadn't told Evelyn about Lena, about the fire, about how his wife had died in childbirth during the war. The doctor stuck on the other side of a river full of bullets. Calder had buried her himself. Held their daughter for 4 hours before she stopped breathing. Then he'd built the forge. Then he'd built the silence, until now there were echoes in the quiet, laughter in the walls, light even in the grief. 2 weeks later, Calder found the drawing. It was on the floor of the forge. A child's scrawl in charcoal. Jagged lines, stick figures. But the shapes told a story. A tree, a rope, a man. A woman with her mouth open in a scream. Children running. He held it in his hands like it was a piece of bone. Evelyn stood behind him, one hand on the doorframe. That's what they saw, she said quietly. What they never forgot. He looked up. Her face was pale, drawn, but steady. He didn't help the raiders. He tried to stop them. The town turned on him anyway. Took justice in their own hands, then burned everything we had. We ran. For 3 winters now? She stepped closer. I didn't ask you to believe me. Calder stared at the drawing. Again. Then folded it gently and tucked it into his coat. You didn't have to, he said. The next day, Calder rode into town. He didn't stop at the supply store. Didn't speak to anyone. He went straight to Sheriff Moxley's office and laid the folded paper on the desk. I'm taking her in, he said. Moxley raised an eyebrow. Meaning? Meaning her and the kids, under my roof, my name. My land. If folks want to come after them, they'll have to come through me. Moxley leaned back in his chair. You're aware she's still listed on a federal bounty ledger. Name's tied to a man executed for treason. Calder's eyes didn't waver. Then cross it out. The sheriff sighed. That's not how it works. Calder stood. Then maybe it's time we change how it works. He walked out without waiting for an answer. That night the horses spooked. It was near midnight. The sky pale with stars. The fire had died to coals. Calder was sharpening his axe when he heard the snort, the wild kicking from the stable. He grabbed the lantern and stepped out, then froze. There. Nailed to the side of the barn, another sign. This one carved deeper. The letters scorched in black. You'll burn next. Underneath it, a rope. No words. Just that, a warning or a promise. Calder didn't sleep that night. Instead, He walked the perimeter of the cabin with his rifle, his boots cutting fresh scars into the snow. Evelyn watched from the window. The children curled behind her like shadows afraid of dawn. She didn't ask what he was doing. She already knew. In the morning. Calder put the rope in the stove and lit it with a match. Ash rose through the chimney and drifted over the trees. No one came near the cabin that day, and yet the silence felt louder than any scream. The sky broke open before dawn. Low clouds rolled across the hills like morning veils, swallowing the stars one by one. Snow had stopped, but the air was sharp, still, and mean. The kind of morning that held its breath, waiting for something to go wrong. Calder rose before the fire had even warmed the stones. He dressed in silence, boots thudding heavy on the floorboards. Evelyn stirred behind the curtain, still half sick. Her children wrapped around her like roots clinging to a tree that refused to fall. He glanced at Jonah, curled in the loft. Still breathing. Still whole, outside, the yard was quiet. Too quiet. The animals hadn't made a sound all morning. Not even a huff from the mare or the rooster's cry. The kind of silence Calder remembered from the war, the breathless hush before men charged into cannon fire. He stepped onto the porch. Then he saw it, boot prints. Deep, fresh, circling the shed. They hadn't come from the house, hadn't gone to the barn. They'd appeared from the woods like ghosts and vanished the same way. A chill climbed Calder's spine. He followed the tracks with a rifle in one hand, axe looped across his back. Around the back of the forge, near the chopped wood pile, something glinted in the dirt. A shell casing, still warm. He looked up. Movement in the trees. Then the snap of a branch. Then, bang, the shot ripped through the morning, cracking the stillness in two. Calder ducked, rolled behind the forge wall, eyes sweeping the tree line. Another shot, closer. He could hear hooves now, just one horse. Not fast, not galloping, but deliberate, pacing. A figure emerged from the fog, tall, coated in black. Oilskin, a wide-brimmed hat shadowing his face. His rifle gleamed like ice. You've got something that don't belong to you, the man called out. Voice like gravel dragged through ash. Calder stepped into the open. Slow and measured. She belongs to no one, he said. She's got a price on her head. You know what kind of people follow bounties in winter? The man smiled. The desperate kind. You picked the wrong fire to warm your hands. Calder replied. The man raised his rifle. Calder lunged for cover behind the trough as a shot blasted the side of the shed. Splinters flew. Inside the cabin, he could hear Evelyn shouting, the children scrambling. Another shot. Closer, then the door creaked open. No, Calder muttered under his breath. Don't come out. But it was too late. Evelyn stepped into the cold. She wasn't armed. She wasn't trembling. She just stood there. Hair braided back, coat tight across her chest, arms out to her sides like wings. Take me, she sobbed. Leave them. The bounty hunter froze. Even Calder hesitated. He'd seen soldiers flinch. Seen men beg. Seen mothers wail and priests break. But he'd never seen anyone look death in the eye like that, and offer themselves so quietly. I'm not here for a sermon, the bounty man growled. I'm here for what's mine. She's not. Yours, Calder said, stepping forward again, rifle raised. You'll die for her? Calder's jaw tightened. I already did. Then, movement in the loft. A shadow, Jonah. The boy had climbed to the top of the shed and now held a coil of rope, the very rope someone had left as a threat. His eyes were wide but steady. Calder followed his son's gaze. The beam above the bounty man, a plan. Unspoken, a silent bond. Calder nodded, barely. Jonah let the rope drop. It swung wide. Fast, and the hook at its end smacked the bounties. Horse hard in the flank. The beast reared with a scream, throwing its rider backward into the snow. Calder didn't wait. He charged. The rifle flew from his hands mid-run. No time for aiming. The axe came free in a blur of wood and steel. The man scrambled for his pistol, but Calder's boot hit him square in the ribs. They rolled, fists smashing into frozen earth, breath exploding in clouds of rage and memory. Asterisk, the bounty hunter was fast, trained. He pulled a knife from his boot and slashed upward, carving Calder's arm. Blood burst hot against the snow, but Calder didn't flinch. He drove his knee into the man's gut, tore the blade from his hand, and raised the axe, then stopped. He looked into the man's eyes, saw fear, real fear, asterisk, and for the first time in years, Calder heard Lena's voice in his head, clear as bells in spring, asterisk, mercy always leaves a mark. He didn't swing, he stepped back, panting, asterisk, go, he said, voice hoarse. You come back, I won't hesitate. The man spat blood into the snow. You're a fool, Calder stared at him. Maybe. Asterisk, the bounty hunter limped to his horse, mounted with a groan, and rode off through the fog, trailing blood and defeat behind him like a tattered cloak. Calder collapsed in the snow. Evelyn was there before he hit the ground, wrapping her arms around him, her hands pressed to the wound. You didn't have to. Yes, he gasped. I did. Asterisk, Jonah slid down from the loft, running toward them, eyes wide with pride and terror. The children gathered at the porch steps, and for a long moment the world held its breath again. But this time, it wasn't waiting for death. Asterisk, it was waiting for life to begin. Days passed. Asterisk, the sheriff came. Looked at the blood trail, the broken fence, the slashed sleeve on Calder's coat, said nothing, just left a small tin badge on the porch. Sign, not of law, but of respect. Spring. Arrived late that year, asterisk, but when it came, the first flowers bloomed beside Lena's grave. Asterisk, Calder stood there with Jonah, Evelyn, and 6 children who now had names he knew by heart. Asterisk, they planted apple trees behind the barn, rebuilt the shed. Evelyn moved her things into the house without a word, no ceremony. No questions, just quiet belonging. One night after dinner, as the wind sang soft through the cracks in the walls, Jonah looked up and asked, Asterisk, are we a family now? Calder looked at him, then at Evelyn, then at the stars. Yeah, he said, I reckon we are. And the town? The town stayed silent, but they watched Calder walk the streets, one child at his side, Evelyn at the other, and something in their eyes shifted, not guilt, not approval, but understanding, that sometimes a man doesn't need to justify the fire he keeps burning, only to protect the warmth it gives.